this new idea does not fit in with the way we used to do things, I think we can all certainly agree it will dramatically improve operations.
I hope you'll consider this new plan on its merits.
Thank you for a very interesting proposal. We all appreciate your effort, and I can assure you that we will give it our full attention.
Well, I don't appreciate it. This would rearrange my entire department. They have no idea who
Another
told
crazy proposal, and now I'm late for my next meeting. I don't know why these meetings have to drag on for...
How do they know this idea will work? They've only been here a couple of months.
They don't know how we do things here. Don't they understand we're successful because we do it that way?
It's so easy to say no to a new idea. After all, new ideas cause change. They disrupt the status quo. They create uncertainty. And it's less work to do it the way we've always done it before. Less work, maybe. More dangerous, definitely. New ideas are resisted from boardrooms to shop floors all over the world. Good ideas are shot down by people who assume that the future is merely an extension of the past, that the ideas that have brought us to where we are today are the same ideas that are going to take us to tomorrow. My name is Joel Barker. I'm a futurist. I've worked with corporations and institutions all over the world, helping them to improve their ability to evaluate new ideas and to anticipate change. For almost 20 years, I've been studying change. In particular, I've been studying the resistance to change that often keeps a great new idea from being accepted. You see, it's never been any different. Whether that great idea was a better way to do company business or a scientific breakthrough, people have always resisted change. In Venice in the 16th century, that was Galileo's problem. He was an advocate of the Copernican theory that the sun, not the earth, was the center of the solar system. To prove that theory to the leaders of the day, he took them to the top of that tower, the Tower of San Marco. And there, using his newly perfected telescope, he showed them the discoveries he had made in the night sky that verified that the earth revolved around the sun and not the other way around. Well, to say the least, that was a revolutionary idea. It contradicted obvious observation. In fact, it so antagonized the voices of authority that Galileo was threatened with torture in order to get him to retract his position. And you thought you had trouble selling your ideas. In the end, Galileo's ideas won out. But the real question here is, why the resistance? Whether it's in the 16th century or the 20th century, what prevents us from seeing, accepting, and understanding new ideas? Think about some of the new ideas we've seen in the past 2 decades. From minorities fighting for their basic rights to those rights being guaranteed by law. From room-sized computers costing millions of dollars to desktop computers just as powerful that almost anyone can afford. From an attitude that quality was a luxury for the few to quality being expected by everyone. These changes and hundreds like them are more than mere improvements. They are revolutions. They are changing the world forever. They are causing us to reevaluate old ways of doing things. They are opening doors to possibilities we could not have seen before. They are freeing us from limitations. And yet, every one of these ideas was met with substantial resistance from thoughtful people. Let me ask you again, what is it that keeps us from accepting new ideas? I know the answer to that question. And once you know the answer, you will be more open to innovation, more capable of leading change. You will be ready to discover the future. You see, it all has to do with paradigms. Paradigm. That's an unusual word. You don't hear it every day. I stumbled onto it almost 20 years ago during my studies of scientific discovery. It was a word Thomas Kuhn used to describe a key concept in his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. If you look paradigm up in the Webster's dictionary, you'd find it means a pattern or a model. Let me offer you another definition. Paradigms are sets of rules and regulations that do 2 things. First, they establish boundaries. In a sense, that's what a pattern does. It gives us the edges, the borders. Second, these rules and regulations then go on to tell you how to be successful by solving problems within these boundaries. In his book, Thomas Kuhn was exploring how scientists changed their paradigms of physics or chemistry or biology, and what happened when they did. What he found helps explain why we so often fail to anticipate significant new developments. What he found can help you and me deal with change more effectively. So, what did he discover? Kuhn discovered that paradigms act as filters that screen data coming into the scientist's mind. Data that agrees with the scientist's paradigm has an easy pathway to recognition. In fact, scientists see that kind of data amazingly well, with great clarity and understanding, and that's good. But Kuhn also discovered a startling negative effect. With some of the data, scientists had substantial difficulty. Why? Because that data did not match the expectations created by their paradigms. And in fact, the more unexpected the data was, the more trouble the scientists had perceiving it. In some cases, they simply ignored the unexpected data. Sometimes they distorted that data until it fit their paradigm rather than acknowledge that it was an exception to the rules. And in extreme cases, Kuhn discovered that scientists literally, physiologically were incapable of perceiving the unexpected data. For all intents and purposes, that data was invisible. To put it in more general terms, paradigms filter incoming experience. We are viewing the world through our paradigms all the time. We constantly select from the world that data that best fits our rules and regulations and try to ignore the rest. As a result, what may be perfectly obvious to a person with one paradigm may be totally imperceptible to someone with a different paradigm. I call this phenomenon the paradigm effect. And I have seen repeatedly that what Kuhn describes for scientists is true for anyone who has strongly held rules and regulations in their lives. And who doesn't? In my work with companies around the world, I have seen this paradigm effect blind business people to new opportunities, cause salespeople to overlook new markets, obscure effective strategies from management, and it can blind each and every one of us to creative solutions to difficult problems. Whether it's the Army or the environmental movement, the American Medical Association or the League of Women Voters, whether it's Citibank or IBM, the coach's way to hit the ball or mom's way to clean the kitchen, we deal with paradigms all the time. And I believe that it is our rules and regulations that keep us from successfully anticipating the future, because we try to discover the future by looking for it through our old paradigms. And so in the 1960s, we looked forward and concluded, cheap gas forever. 4 children make an ideal family. Cable television will never catch on. Japanese products will always be junk. And boy, were we wrong. And we were wrong because our paradigms had the power to keep us from seeing what was really happening. Now, you may think this is an interesting abstraction. So I would like to give you concrete examples that demonstrate how paradigms influence the way you and I see and understand the world. I'd like to start with an example similar to one that Thomas Kuhn cites in his book. I'm going to use elements most of you know quite well. Cards from a card deck. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 8 cards very rapidly. I want you to identify them silently to yourself as I go through them. I'll give you a couple of seconds between each card. Ready? Here we go. Good. Now let's go through it a second time for those of you who may have missed some. This time I'm going to give you twice as much time as I gave you the first time. Ready? Go. All right. We're going to go through it one more time just to check things out. This time I'm going to give you 4 times as much time as the last time. Ready? Here we go. Okay, that's it. How many of you noticed something strange about these cards? For example, the second card was a red spade, or that the 5th card was a black heart, or that the last card was another red spade. I know most of you missed these exceptions on the first run through. And I know most of you missed them on the second run-through, too. But I would also bet that almost all of you identified the legitimate cards when they came up. You see, you were misled by your rules and regulations about the way a deck of cards is supposed to be, your card deck paradigm. And that is what was blocking your vision of the exceptional cards. Remember what I said about paradigms, how they filter data? Well, you were trying to see the cards the right way. Right means according to your card deck paradigm. Black spades, black clubs, red hearts, red diamonds. And so you saw the legitimate cards very easily, very quickly. In fact, I know the majority of you saw those cards on the first run through, and that was quicker than a 30th of a second. But your paradigm of card decks also made it very difficult to see the cards that didn't fit the rules. And so instead of seeing them as they were, you distorted the data to try to make it fit your paradigm. That's the paradigm effect in action. And every time you run into something that's beyond the boundaries of your paradigm, you will have difficulty seeing it. You just won't get it. Now, this is a funny deck of cards. So you might want to write off this entire experience as interesting but irrelevant to real life. So let's talk about paradigms and real life. For instance, millions of Americans have now adopted the fitness paradigm. They have brand new rules and regulations about exercise. But how many of you would be willing to go for a 70-mile run? Yes, I said run. Now, in Western culture, the words 70 miles and run just don't go together. 70 miles and drive, yes. Run, no. But in northern Mexico, 70-mile runs are common among the Tarahumaran Indians. They do it as part of a religious festival. Now, why is it so easy for them, yet so impossible for us? Because it's one of the Tarahumaran paradigms. They run everywhere for fun. Would you believe our ultimate race, the 26-mile marathon, is child's play for the Tarahumarans? Now, you might want to argue it's some kind of genetic difference, but I'm willing to bet if any of you had been raised in one of their villages, you'd run just like they do, because you would have learned their running paradigm. I've brought you to this vocational technical center in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, to show you another paradigm. This one has to do with automobiles. In 1976, a group of students in the advanced class taught by Ernie Parker decided to build an energy-efficient car. Let me give you the numbers on the car. It weighed 2,000 pounds. It went 0 to 60 in less than 10 seconds. It got 77 miles per gallon on a 16-horsepower engine. Now, anybody who knows anything about cars knows that that's impossible. You can't take that heavy a car to those speeds with only a 16-horsepower engine. And yet, these students did exactly that. How? By using a different paradigm. You see, these students weren't in the advanced auto mechanics class. They were right here in the advanced fluid power technology class. And they knew, using their paradigm, that they could capture and reuse energy ordinary cars waste. Let me show you how. It's actually a very simple design. When this car slows down, it doesn't use standard brakes, which just create heat and friction. Instead, the back wheels turn a hydraulic pump, and it pumps hydraulic fluid into this storage chamber and builds up pressure. Now, building up that pressure is resistance, and that slows the car down. When this car is at a stop sign, it doesn't idle its engine. Instead, it runs the engine 80% open throttle. And that engine turns a hydraulic pump, which pumps more fluid and pressure into that storage chamber. Result, when this car begins to accelerate after the stoplight has changed, the acceleration comes not from the little engine, but all that energy that's been stored in that cylinder. In fact, let me demonstrate. I can accelerate without even starting the engine. So, the little gasoline engine merely holds the car at speed, and it can do that getting more than 70 miles per gallon. That's pretty clever. Now, the paradigm question is this. If the students who designed this car had been in auto mechanics, do you think they could have even conceived it? I think the answer is no, because the auto mechanics paradigm does not provide for waste energy storage. Now, I'm not suggesting this car is perfect. It has lots of bugs, but it does demonstrate how powerful paradigms can be. What may be impossible with one paradigm may be easy to do with another paradigm. Let me show you another paradigm change in technology. This one is small but interesting, especially to me. What is this? Look at it this way. Look at it this way. Look at it this way. Yes, it's a bicycle seat, and obviously it breaks the bicycle seat paradigm. It was invented by a sculptor and a futurist. I was the futurist. Jeffrey Birch was a sculptor. I came up with the idea, and together we developed it. We call it the easy seat. Now, it's no big deal. It's not going to save the world or anything like that, though it does save some pain in a few particularly sensitive areas. When you look at it, it makes a kind of sense, doesn't it? And yet, from the invention of the bicycle, another shape has totally dominated the market. It looks like this, and it's called a bicycle saddle. And I believe it is the word saddle that has kept bike makers from exploring shapes like the easy seat. You see, this is a logical redesign of a horse saddle for a bicycle. And once they got the saddle paradigm, the bike makers honed it and refined it and forgot to ask the basic question: what is the most comfortable way to sit on a bicycle? And that's where I had an advantage. I wasn't part of the bicycle industry. I didn't know any better. I wasn't saddled with their paradigm. And so I invented an unusual looking but comfortable bike seat. By the way, you can imagine what avid bikers think of the easy seat. It doesn't fit the rules, so they don't like it. Yet. There is a story told in business circles worth repeating here. In the late 1930s, an inventor was trying to interest corporations in his new idea. He experienced rejection after rejection because no one was taking his invention seriously. He brought it to the research department of a major photographic company. He felt sure they would be interested because his invention was a new kind of photography. Here is the actual kit he used to demonstrate the process. While a senior researcher looked on, he began by sensitizing a specially coated metal plate. Then he took a transparency and placed the metal plate on top of it and exposed both to a very bright light. Then he poured a fine black powder over the plate and tapped the excess away. What was left on the plate was a faint reminder of the image that had been on the slide. He had, in fact, created a kind of photograph of that image. Now, we don't know what the researcher said about all this. He may have found it amusing and laughed. He may have said it was too complicated or too crude, or he may have been upset at all the black powder all over his desk. But we do know one thing for sure. He wasn't interested in that silly invention, so he showed the inventor to the door. But the inventor, Chester Carlson, had the last laugh. Here's a copy of his original patent. His discovery turned out to be one of the most profitable innovations in the history of industry. You see, what Chester Carlson invented was electrostatic photography, the Xerox process. Imagine any office today without a copier. But But that photographic researcher was blinded to the potential of this new invention because it didn't fit his rules and regulations of how photography should be. He was unable to see beyond his paradigm. As a result, his company missed one of the biggest business opportunities of the 20th century. Let me show you another example of the power and influence of paradigms. Join me now as I'm giving a lecture to a group of corporate managers. I'm going to show you 3 words, all right? And I'm going to ask you to think back to the early 60s and ask yourself, what kinds of judgmental statements, judgmental feelings would I have had about these 3 words back in the early 60s? The 3 words are made in Japan. Okay, now in 1960, what are the words that would have come to mind when you saw those products, please?
Junk.
Junk, all right. What else?
Cheap.
Cheap, okay, what else?
Poor quality.
Poor quality, that's a good one. Poor quality. What else?
Copies.
Copies. Those are stealing again. What else?
Low tech.
All right. Okay. Good. Toys. Low tech. Toys. Anything else come to mind?
Imitation.
Imitation. Okay, that's enough. Now, let's ask about today. What kinds of judgmental words come to mind when you run into these 3 words, made in Japan?
Excellent quality.
Excellent quality. Okay, what else?
High tech.
High tech. Aha, that's good. What else?
Expensive.
Expensive. Went from cheap to expensive, huh? Okay, another one.
Leadership.
Okay, another one.
Balance of payments.
Another one.
Innovation.
Innovation. What a nice compliment. Anything else? All right. Actually, that's enough when you look at it. What's most interesting about this is, do you notice the contrasts? In many cases, you have given me opposites. What they were doing in the early 60s, they have totally reversed in the 80s. And the key point here is this. What this represents, I believe, is a change of paradigms. What they did, and they actually started in the 50s when Ed Deming, an American, went to Japan, is they adopted a new series of rules and regulations, what we call zero defect production, or now we're calling it Japanese management or participatory management. And what they did is they got people involved in perfecting things. See, I believe the Japanese have created an epidemic of quality worldwide. And it's a disease which, if you don't get it, you may not survive. People tell me, paradigms, that's a cute idea, but who really cares? Tell me about it. There is a crucial and profound truth hiding behind all the paradigm examples I've shown you. I call it the going back to zero rule, and if you remember nothing else, remember this. When a paradigm shifts, everyone goes back to zero. It doesn't matter how big your market share is, or how strong your reputation, or how good you are at the old paradigm. With the new one, you go back to zero. Your past success guarantees nothing. Now, you may think I'm exaggerating, so let me illustrate. What nation dominated the world of watchmaking in 1968? Of course, Switzerland, renowned for more than 100 years for watchmaking excellence. In 1968, they had 65% of the world market share, and according to expert estimations, more than 80% of the profits. That's market domination. Yet, 10 years later, their market share had plummeted to below 10%, and in the ensuing 3 years, they had to release 50,000 of their 65,000 watch workers. Today, what nation dominates the world in watchmaking? Japan. In 1968, they had virtually no market share. How could the Swiss, who commanded the watchmaking industry for the entire 20th century, who were known for excellence and innovation in their products, be so rapidly destroyed? Well, the answer is painfully simple. They were put back to zero by a paradigm shift. Many of you are wearing that paradigm shift on your wrists right now. The quartz movement watch. Think about it. Totally electronic. 1,000 times more accurate than the mechanical watches it replaced. Battery powered. Amazingly versatile. It deserves to be the new paradigm of timekeeping. It's such a brilliant idea. Wouldn't you like to know who invented this marvelous watch? Some of you know the answer, but those of you who don't will be surprised. The quartz watch was invented by the Swiss themselves, right here in Neuchâtel at their research laboratories. Yet when the researchers presented this idea to the Swiss watch manufacturers in 1967, it was rejected. After all, it didn't have any bearings, it didn't have any gears, it didn't even have a mainspring. It couldn't possibly be the future of watches. So confident were the manufacturers in that conclusion that they didn't even protect the idea. And so later that year, their researchers displayed the watch to the world at the annual Watch Congress. Texas Instruments of America and Seiko of Japan walked past, took one look, and the rest is history. Now, why didn't the Swiss appreciate this wonderful invention that their own people had created? It's the power of paradigms again. They were blinded by the success of their old paradigm and all their investments in it. And when confronted with a profoundly new and different way to continue their success into the future, it didn't fit the rules they were already so good at. Please keep in mind that this is a story not just about the Swiss. It's a story about anyone, any organization, any nation who assumes what has been successful in the past must continue to be successful in the future. Let me remind you once again, when a paradigm shifts, everyone goes back to zero. Your past guarantees nothing in the future if the rules change. Not even the best watchmakers in the world could stop time. In fact, if you're not careful, your successful past will block your vision to the future. And that is why you must develop an openness to new ideas, a willingness to explore different ways of doing things. Because only through that kind of tolerance can you keep open your doors to the future. I could go on and on with examples. I have more than 350 in my files. The key point here is paradigms dramatically affect our judgments and our decision-making by influencing our perceptions. And it is clear to me that if we want to make good judgments about the future, to anticipate the future successfully, we must be able to recognize our present paradigms and then be ready to go beyond them. You see, a paradigm is a two-edged sword. When you swing it one way, it cuts the information that agrees with it into very fine, precise detail. But when you swing it the other way, it will cut you away from data that runs counter to the paradigm. You see best what you're supposed to see, just like the Swiss. And you see poorly or not at all that data that doesn't fit the paradigm. Let me now share with you the key observations about paradigms. Number one, paradigms are common. We have them in almost all aspects of our life, whether it's professional or personal, spiritual or social. Point number two, paradigms are useful. Now you may have thought I don't like paradigms because all the things I've said about them, but that's not the case. In fact, they show us what's important and what's not. They help us find important problems, and then they go on to give us rules for helping to solve those problems. They focus our attention, and that's good. But, and this is point number three, and it's a warning, sometimes your paradigm can become the paradigm, the only way to do something. And when you're confronted with an alternative idea, you reject it out of hand. Now that can lead to a nasty disorder. I call that disorder paradigm paralysis. Paradigm paralysis is a terminal disease of certainty. It's easy to get, and more than a few institutions have been destroyed by it. That's exactly what happened to the Swiss watch manufacturers in 1968. This reminds me of a phrase. Those who say it cannot be done should get out of the way of those who are doing it. Point number 4. The people who create new paradigms are usually outsiders. They are not part of the established paradigm community. Now, they can be young, they can be old. Age seems to be irrelevant. But what is clear is they are not invested in the old paradigm, so they have nothing to lose by creating the new. Now, this means something very special for you, because if you want to find the new paradigms that are developing in your field, you must look beyond the center to the fringes, because almost always the new rules are written at the edge. That's where Xerox started. That's where Apple computers began. That's where the women's movement started. All of them at the edge. Point number 5. Those practitioners of the old paradigm who choose to change to the new paradigm early in its development, I call them paradigm pioneers, have to be very courageous. Because you see, the evidence provided by the new paradigm does not prove that they should be doing this. Now, let me quote from Thomas Kuhn, because he writes about this situation the very best. The person who embraces a new paradigm at an early stage must often do so in defiance of the evidence provided by the problem solving. He must, that is, have faith that the new paradigm will succeed with the many large problems that confront it, knowing only that the older paradigm has failed in a few. A decision of that kind can only be made on faith. The mark of a true paradigm pioneer is great courage and trust in their judgment. Now for the last point, and the most important. You can choose to change your rules and regulations. Human beings are not genetically encoded to just one way of looking at the world. You can choose to shrug off one paradigm and adopt a new paradigm. You can choose to see the world anew. That's why I'm such an optimist about the future. Now, to challenge you to flex your paradigms, I would like to give you the paradigm shift question. Whenever I'm with an organization or company, I always ask this question of them. What today is impossible to do in your business, but if it could be done, would fundamentally change what you do? Think about that. Hard. Ask that question. Play with it. But ask it on a regular basis, everywhere in your organization, because the answers to that question will take you to the boundaries of your paradigm. And once you are there, you will be ready to see the next paradigms coming. Remember, what is impossible today may be the norm tomorrow. And your challenge is either to cause that to happen or be ready to pioneer. There's a story I'd like to tell you now. There once was a young man with a very fast car who loved to drive on country roads. He thought of himself as a great driver. He could handle anything. One day he was out driving his favorite road and coming into his favorite curve, when around the curve came a car careening out of control. And just before it got to him, it pulled into its lane. As it passed, the woman yelled out, "Pig!" Well, he responded in a flash and shot back, "Cow!" He thought to himself, how dare she call me a name? I was in my lane. She was the one who was all over the place. But he felt rather smug because he got her before she got away. And so he put the accelerator to the floor, whipped around the curve, and ran into the pig. Now that's a paradigm story. You see, the young man was responding with old rules. You call me a name, I'll call you a name. Yet when you think about it, she was really trying to warn him. I believe the next 10 years are going to be filled with people coming around blind curves yelling things at you. And if you have paradigm flexibility, what you will be hearing will be opportunities. But if you have paradigm paralysis, what you will be hearing will sound like threats. The choice will be entirely yours. We've been talking about the anticipation of the future, so you may wonder what we're doing in front of this house from the late 19th century. I've chosen to conclude my remarks here because sometimes people get overwhelmed by the future. They look forward and they say, how can we cope with all of this change? The answer to that question, I think, can be found by looking back to our great-grandparents. In many ways, they dealt with changes at least as profound as what we're involved in right now. You must remember, in 1890, radio would have still been considered magic. I mean, inaudible voices traveling through the air without wires. The radio wasn't demonstrated until 1901. Between 1890 and 1910, Henry Ford built his first automobile. The movie camera was invented. The Wright brothers proved the experts wrong and created a new paradigm of heavier-than-air flight. X-rays were discovered. Electric lights had only begun to replace kerosene lamps and gas illumination. The electron was discovered. The cause of malaria was identified. And a man named Albert Einstein proved that E equals mc squared, and the atomic age was conceived. The paradigms of our grandparents were forever altered during this time. And you know what? In spite of all that change, they did just fine. We wouldn't be here if they hadn't. So, even though the future sometimes seems too large, too awesome, too powerful to deal with, it's not. We as human beings have demonstrated repeatedly the capacity to create and deal with paradigm changes. You see, there will always be another solution to the problem. There will always be another door to go through to get to the future. And just like it was for our grandparents, I am positive that on the other side of that door lies more than enough opportunity to keep those of us who are willing to be flexible happy and busy for a lifetime.
It all started on one of those typical July afternoons in Coleman, Texas. A hot wind from the Panhandle was blowing fine-grained Texas topsoil right through my in-laws' house. But despite the heat, we were having what for Coleman was a rip-roaring afternoon of Sunday entertainment.
Domino.
Your game, hon.
Well, that's another one for Jerry. Shuffle 'em. Just my luck to get a son-in-law that can beat me at dominoes.
That young fella there is me. Right after we were married, my wife Beth and I used to spend 2 glorious weeks of our summer vacation visiting with her parents. And while we were there, we frequently immersed ourselves in the group dynamics of a good old-fashioned game of dominoes. Later, I went on to study group dynamics of a different sort in all kinds of organizations. But is it so different? The fact is, the more I learn about the way we deal with one another in organizations, the more I'm reminded of that hot Sunday, July afternoon in Coleman, Texas, and something I now call the Abilene paradox.
It's 104 degrees in Coleman. Stay tuned for livestock report. But first, here's a little music.
15.
$5. Hey, what do you all say we get in the car and go to Abilene, have supper at the cafeteria?
Well, how far away is Abilene?
53 miles.
You got the air conditioning in that Buick fixed yet?
Nope.
Well, sounds like a good idea to me. I'd like to go. How about you, Jerry?
Yeah, it sounds like a good idea to me. But I don't want to go unless your mama wants to go.
Oh, well, of course I want to go. Oh, well, y'all don't think I want to eat leftovers out of the icebox, do you?
So, we all piled into the furnace and headed off for Abilene. Some 4 hours and 106 miles later, after a supper that could have provided first-rate testimonial for antacid, we returned to Coleman. For a long while, there was absolute, teetotal silence.
It's a great trip, wasn't it?
Well, to tell the truth, I'd rather have stayed right here. Only y'all hadn't pressured me to go along.
What do you mean, y'all? I didn't want to go. I only went along to satisfy the rest of you. You're the culprits.
Don't call me a culprit. You and Daddy and Mama are the ones that wanted to go. I just went along to be sociable.
Hey, I never wanted to go to Abilene to begin with. I was just making conversation. How'd I know y'all was gonna take me up on it and ruin my whole day?
It just didn't make sense. Here we were, 4 reasonably normal people who took a trip to Abilene we really didn't want to take. You know, though, a lot of other organizations take similar trips. I later came to call it the Abilene paradox, which is as follows. Organizations frequently take actions contrary to the desires of any of their members and defeat the very purposes they set out to achieve. The road to Abilene usually begins like this. Everybody agrees about the basic nature of the situation and what they want to do.
I can't believe we went to Abilene when nobody wanted to go.
Me neither. Why, I'd been just as
But
happy with leftover
somehow
chicken
they
out of the
failed to
icebox.
communicate their agreement.
Me too.
And based upon such
had a
faulty
case getting
information,
even Jerry at
they do
Domino's.
just the opposite.
Then why did you suggest we go in the first place?
I was just testing the waters. But you all took me serious and ruined a perfectly good Sunday afternoon.
Anger, irritation, frustration. Now, if you folks are wondering if our family ever resolved our conflict, the answer is no. Because strange as it may seem, we were never really in conflict. In fact, the Abilene paradox says it's the inability to manage agreement rather than conflict that's the single most pressing issue of modern organization, as I learned early on in my career. Just out of school, I got hired as a consultant for an intriguing assignment.
So, as I said, production is on a downturn, our profit picture is in transition. None of our staff seems to know why. That's why we brought you in. Any questions?
Sounds pretty straightforward. You want me to find out why Acme's profits and productivity are dropping off the chart.
That's the gist of it. Yes. I sure hope you can pinpoint the problem quick, because we're in real trouble.
Well, what's this Project X all about?
Oh, an albatross. Those guys down in R&D are trying to turn peanut oil into jet fuel. Don't get me wrong, it looked great on paper, but between you and me, it'll never fly.
Why not?
The technology just isn't there yet.
Have you considered scrapping the project?
Not me.
How come?
The stockholders. They love it. Big spread in the Wall Street Journal on it. Besides, I've got a vice president who has staked her reputation on the success of this project.
Well, is she aware of your reservations?
Are you kidding? I've got an ulcer myself already. Think I want to give her one?
So what do you do?
Oh, I go down to her office every few days and say, hang in there, victory or death, stiff upper lip, you know, stuff like that. Isn't that what a president's supposed to do? No, young man, you're barking up the wrong tree, but good luck.
I decided to find out what the VP thought about Project X.
Thank you, Betty.
So, you must see a lot of potential in this project. To stake your career on it, huh?
Peanut oil into jet fuel? You've got to be kidding. No, Project X is a dead-end street.
I don't get it. Why not stop it?
You try to stop with the president coming in your office every few days, telling you to hang in there, victory or death, stiff upper lip, and all that type of stuff.
So why don't you tell him you think it's a dead-end street?
Not me. That project is a sacred cow. And besides, I have an R&D director who has staked his reputation on making that project a success. Anyway, those project reports down in R&D are starting to look more optimistic. Who knows? Maybe those people down in R&D can pull a rabbit out of their hat after all. Believe me, it wouldn't be the first time.
Maybe the president was right. Maybe I was barking up the wrong tree. I decided to forget Project X and get back to the job I thought I was hired for.
So as director of R&D, in your opinion, why do you think Acme's profits are slipping?
Did you ever try to turn peanut oil into jet fuel? Stupidest damn idea I've ever heard.
The VP said all your reports were...
Oh, I write those things ambiguously enough so that the board can interpret it any way it pleases. In fact, I sort of slanted towards the positive side, given how committed the brass are to the project.
But if the project's unworkable, why don't you tell them?
See the woman in that office?
It's empty.
Exactly. Rumor has it she was the last person to criticize Project X. Look, I'm middle-aged. I've got 2 kids in college. I've got alimony payments. There's no job market out there for a guy with my skills. Everybody on the board is in favor of this project. Every single day, I've got the president and the vice president down here telling me victory or death, stiff upper lip, hang in there, and all that stuff.
I should have seen it then. The culprit wasn't Project X, but rather the company's inability to cope with unanimous agreement that the project was doomed to failure. A few years later, I discovered that the paradox not only applies to corporations, but also to couples.
Hello, Professor Harvey.
Why do you look so down, Sue?
You'd be down, too, if you had to get married Saturday.
But George is a great boy.
Well, sure he is. But I don't love him. I don't even like him. In fact, I can't stand him.
Then why in the world are you marrying him?
He gave me an engagement ring.
But if you don't love him, don't you think you ought to give it back?
I can't do that. Mama loves him. She has a heart condition. If I backed out now, she'd have a heart attack. Besides, there's a room full of presents, and all my bridesmaids have their dresses. I have relatives driving in from Mississippi. The announcements have already gone out to the newspapers. This is a small town. I'd be the laughingstock. I'm not that pretty. I'd never get married.
How'd all this happen?
Oh, you got me. I gave her a ring, and now I'm marrying a girl I don't even love.
About 2 hours later, it was George's turn.
If you don't love her, why don't you ask her for it back?
Oh, I can't do that. Oh, if I jilted Sue, it'd kill her. Besides, her mama thinks the world of me. And then there's all these presents.
The crazy thing was, Sue and George were in total agreement, but they still seemed determined to spend a lifetime together on the road to Abilene.
Anyway, I'm not all that good looking. I may not get another chance if I don't marry Sue. After all, who wants to marry a guy whose fiancée attempted suicide?
Now let's go on to item 5 on the agenda of this meeting on faculty collaboration.
I was beginning to realize that nobody's immune to the paradox, and that includes yours truly. A fact that hit home one day while I was in one of those faculty meetings, the kind where nobody really wants to be there.
Now, who's going to kick this one off? You, Professor?
I don't know. What about team teaching?
All right. What do you all say about team teaching?
Mrs. Goldbat would never be able to get it in the fall calendar.
Yeah, we tried it at my last school. Teachers would be cutting each other's throats.
It would be total confusion to the students. I think the whole idea would be a waste of time.
Talk about a waste of time.
What was that, Professor Harvey?
Oh, I said it'd be a waste of time. Team teaching, that is.
Well, then I'll entertain a motion to table the team teaching issue until after the afternoon break.
I so move.
Motion is carried. Now let's move on without further delay to item 6 on the agenda, policing the faculty lounge. Now, some of the younger faculty members haven't been signing out for their coffee and supplies. You are well aware our budget is very thin.
Pretty absurd, isn't it? People taking actions in contradictions to what they really want, and as a result, compounding their problems rather than solving them. Of course, absurdity is an essential element of the Abilene paradox, whether it's couples, corporations, professors, or even nations. But the big question is why? Now, I've seen a fair number of trips to Abilene and points west, and I've reached this conclusion. To understand the paradox, we have to come to grips with the psychological principles from which it draws its enormous power.
To be or not to be, that is the question.
First of all, there's action anxiety, which has been with us since ancient times. It's epitomized by perhaps the most famous dramatic character of all times, Shakespeare's Hamlet.
To sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dream...
If folks are anxious about which action they wish to take, even though, unlike Hamlet, they may have a perfectly sensible one in mind, they may simply refuse to act at all.
Thus, conscience doth make cowards of us all.
To maintain my integrity or to compromise it, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to risk managing a doomed research project.
The R&D director's dilemma is not so far removed from that of Hamlet. Both men know exactly what they want to do, but simply can't get cracking.
Which makes us bear those jobs we have rather than fly to others we know not of. Thus unemployment doth make cowards of us all.
Second, we often conjure up elaborate negative fantasies of the disasters we're certain will occur if we do act sensibly.
Well, what'll happen if you call it off, Sue?
You know what'll happen if I call off this wedding.
No, I don't. Tell me.
Well, her mama will keel over and it'll all be my fault.
Such dire predictions give us an ironclad excuse for inaction, when what is really called for is action. Negative fantasy, then, provides a bizarre justification for not taking a risk.
How could I face myself in the mirror?
Me, a murderer. And I'm only a sophomore.
But can we ever really play it safe?
So while I agree that we've had some minor...
The answer is no. Real risk is a condition of human existence. All our actions have consequences that may well be worse than standing still.
As to the matter of the budget for Project X, I feel that we should maintain our current level of financial support.
Then you agree that we should continue to fund the project for another year?
Absolutely.
So do I. I think we may have a real winner. All in favor?
But if we're afraid to accept real risk as one of life's givens, we may choose a trip to Abilene instead, a choice that often has far greater risk. So what do we fear? The unknown?
Perfect day for golf.
Or tennis. You could tell the chairman we need a fourth.
I like my job, you tell him.
More likely it's something we know rather well. We fear being ostracized. We fear being branded a non-team player. In short, we fear separation.
Why don't you move to adjourn?
What's the problem, Harvey? No guts?
No tenure.
But therein lies a paradox within a paradox. Because the more unwilling we are to risk separation, the more likely we are to experience the separation we so fear. Our negative fantasies actually become more real to us than the certain disaster of pursuing what we know is a hopeless course of action.
Please be seated. We have gathered here today to join this man and this woman in the immutable bonds of holy matrimony.
Formula 6. 4 seconds. I don't know what we're going to do.
The R&D director refused to risk losing his job by criticizing Project X.
Well, can you believe it? We're in the Wall Street Journal again.
Great. They spell our names right this time.
Yes, unfortunately.
But by not voicing his true opinions, he virtually guaranteed the very thing he feared most, being separated, being fired. So far, all we've talked about are the reasons individuals and organizations get on the road to Abilene. Luckily, there are still some ways a costly trip to Abilene can be sidetracked, but you have to be able to spot the road signs.
Our research and development is sucking the entire company down. We fail to meet payroll. We're losing confidence.
One of the foolproof signs of arrival in Abilene is the search for a scapegoat.
I want to know who is responsible.
Such assignment of blame is both irrelevant and wasteful.
Well, don't look at me. I was relying on those progress reports out of R&D.
Because focusing on conflict when agreement is the issue is an act totally devoid of reality.
Wait a minute. You're not laying this one off on me.
Like heck I'm not. I'm removing you from the project. In fact, I'm assigning all of R&D to the vice president until further notice.
More important, by the time an organization reaches this point, all its members are victims.
If there is anyone present who can show reason why these people should not be joined in the eternal bonds of holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. Do you, George, take this woman, Sue, for your
In a sense, all passengers on the Abilene Express conspire with one another to bring about the problem, and all are equally to blame.
as long as you both shall live?
I do.
Do you, Sue, take this man, George?
Unless, of course, a way is found to break the grip of such conspiracy.
For richer or for poorer, in sickness or in health, as long as you both shall live?
I
Why doesn't somebody move to adjourn?
You're the vice chair. You do it. The chairman called this turkey in the first place. He should stop it.
Placing responsibility on the boss is just another form of collusion. In fact, all members are equally responsible.
All right, people, let's get started. We table the team.
Each of us has a choice. We can remain silent.
So now, has anyone any new thoughts on how to collaborate better in the
Or we can confront the organization, not with new information, but with what the group already agrees upon.
Yes, Professor Harvey.
Mr. Chairman, I don't really want to collaborate with anybody. As a matter of fact, I really don't even want to be at this meeting, but I'll stay if that's what the rest of y'all want to do. I'd really be interested in hearing your preferences.
Damn, you too. Let's get out of here.
Amen.
I'll go for that.
Thank you.
So, we can cope with the paradox, but it's not easy. First, each individual has to calculate the real risk of taking action, as well as the risk of taking no action at all.
We've cut back on technicians, clerical, utilities. We've scrapped every non-essential.
Then, what is required is confrontation in a group setting, where individuals own up to their own beliefs and feelings, without attributing beliefs and feelings to others.
Does anybody else have any bright ideas?
I think we should cut Project X. Hear me out. I know I've sung its praises as much as anybody, but I honestly don't believe that Project X is going to work. I think it's a black hole, and nothing is going to come out of it.
You know, I think terminating this project could significantly enhance our financial profile. We have a chance, just a chance, of recouping first quarter losses.
Do you realize what you're saying?
Yes. Yes, I do. I only wish I had said it earlier. This project has been ill-advised from the start. It could even bankrupt us.
Do you mean that you and I and the rest of us have been dragging along a research project that none of us thought would work?
It's crazy.
I don't know how we did it.
Me neither. Let's cancel the damn thing and figure out how we can get going on something productive, like saving this company. Sure. We could.
The Alilene paradox. You wouldn't think folks could make something so simple as being in agreement into such a problem. But how can we tell when we're on the trail to Alilene? Well, remember our original Alilene. First, everyone agreed about the nature of the situation and what they wanted to do.
I can't believe we went to Abilene when nobody wanted to go.
Me neither. I'd have been just as
Second,
happy.
they failed to communicate that agreement.
Well, me too.
Third, they took actions contrary to what they really wanted to do.
Then why did you suggest we go in the first place?
I was just testing the waters. You all took me serious and ruined a perfectly good Sunday afternoon.
As a result, everyone experienced anger, frustration, and heck, I think this is where we came in.
Well, do you think I wanted to go? I just went because I thought you all was getting bored.
Bored? Better than getting cooked alive.
It's a paradox, all right. But paradoxes are usually such because they're based on a logic different from what we've come to understand or expect. If we can break that logic and also have the courage of our convictions, our organizations can grow and flourish.
I'm gonna make an educated guess that you don't have the 66.
Domino.
I guess I need a mite more education.
What do you all say we get in the car, drive up to Amarillo for some ice cream?
Someone once said we'd better pay attention to the future because that's where we're going to spend the rest of our lives. Yet too often those are just words to many people who end up finding themselves fixed almost entirely on the present. Or they dream about the future, but they do nothing about it. And so their dreams seem at best elusive and at worst unattainable. But to believe that about the future is a mistake. Hello, my name is Joel Barker. And we've come here to talk about why positive visions of the future are so important, even essential, to nations and organizations, to corporations and communities, to individuals young and old, to each and every one of us who want to make a difference in the world. I began my study of the future in 1973, just as the Vietnam War was ending. OPEC had taken control of energy pricing. Watergate was beginning, and inflation was soaring beyond control around the world. For many people, from corporate leaders to the person on Main Street, the problems of the present seemed so overwhelming that it seemed pointless to think about the future. And yet, in the midst of all that turbulence and pessimism, I came upon the works of three scholars who showed me that having exactly the opposite attitude, a positive one, was much wiser. Each of these scholars, in his own way, convinced me that it is essential that we think about, dream about, and ultimately envision our own futures, especially in the really tough times. In fact, I believe that having a positive vision of the future is perhaps the most forceful motivator for change that you and I possess. We are now going to take a journey to see how these ideas fit together and to see how we can use these ideas to make our own organizations, our own families, our own lives richer and more fulfilling. We begin our journey here because of a Dutch scholar, Fred Polak, who wrote a book entitled The Image of the Future. Polak was intensely interested in the relationship between nations and their image of the future. He asked a kind of chicken and egg question. Is a nation's positive image of its future the consequence of the nation's success, or is the nation's success a consequence of its positive image of its future? To find an answer to that question, he read the literature of many nations, both ancient and modern, to see how positively they wrote about their future and how well they lived up to their expectations. What he found is perfectly symbolized here in Athens at the Parthenon. The Parthenon was first a vision in the mind of the architect. So too did the Greeks envision the future of their culture. How did this all happen? Well, the Greeks began with dreams, but then they changed those dreams into something much more powerful: vision. Vision is the result of dreams in action. What Pollock found in his research was that significant vision preceded significant success. In example after example, he saw the same pattern emerge. First, a compelling image of the future was offered by leaders. Then that image was shared with their community, and they agreed to support it. Then together, acting in concert, they made the vision a reality. It was true here in Greece 2,500 years ago. And it was the same for Rome, and for Spain, for Venice, for England, for France. It was the same pattern for the United States of America. And even today, we can see the power of vision sweeping across the world, from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Rim. What is particularly interesting to me in Pollock's research is the fact that many of the nations, as they began their climb to greatness, did not have the right resources, or the critical population base, or an obvious strategic advantage. In fact, they succeeded against the odds. What they did have was a profound vision of their own future, and that is the key ingredient. Not the only one, but the first and most important. Nations with vision are powerfully enabled. Nations without vision are at risk. I used to be a school teacher, and after I read Fred Pollock, I realized that what he was saying for nations was equally true for children. Children are profoundly affected by their vision of the future. From my own experience, I'd seen a pattern. My very best students always knew where they were going, what they were going to do with their lives. When I read Benjamin Singer's scholarly work, The Future-Focused Role Image, I found that my observations were strongly reinforced by a lot of research. The research summarized by Singer indicated that low-performance students had almost no sense of their future. Their focus was strictly short-term, and they believed the ability to shape their future was in the hands of fate. They were personally powerless. The research also indicated that successful students had a much greater personal sense of control over their future, and they thought in time horizons of 5 to 10 years out. One thing in particular intrigued me about the research. In identifying the successful students, IQ and family background were not the key indicators of success. Some of the most successful students came from very difficult family and social situations and did not score well on the standard IQ tests. Some of the most unsuccessful students had genius IQs and came from the best of families. So, what was the key differentiator? Vision. What all the successful students shared was a profound and positive vision of their future. I can think of no better place to bring Singer's observations to life than to visit this elementary school, PS 121, in Harlem, in New York. Here in 1981, Eugene Lang came to give the commencement speech. He had graduated from PS 121 in 1933 and was now a successful, wealthy, self-made man. He had a lot of concern over the problems these children faced, and so he was planning to try to instill some hope in them. But as he sat on this platform and looked across the faces of those sixth graders and their family and their friends, he realized that words alone would have little meaning. So on the spot, he changed his speech. And the changes in his speech would change the lives of those children forever. He began by making a personal connection to the children by telling them how he had been in Washington, D.C. when Martin Luther King had given his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. Then he said to those sixth graders, "Everyone must have a dream. Your dream is important. It can be your future, and education is the key to that future." He spoke to their journey through junior high and then senior high school and then on to college. But when he said college, he realized that college must seem unattainable to most of these kids. So he said to them, and don't think for a minute you can't go to college, because you can. And then, with the family and friends listening, he promised those sixth graders that he personally would provide each and every one of them who graduated from high school a college scholarship. Here were these sixth graders thinking that they could not expect to go to college, and all of a sudden, this promise. Mr. Lang sat down to the cheers of the audience, but he knew that money alone was not going to make this happen. He would have to provide a pathway to the promise. So almost immediately, in addition to giving his money, Mr. Lang created a support structure of the teachers and parents and community to work with these students to make sure that they would realize their marvelous vision. From past history of this school, you would have been able to predict that of those sixth graders who graduated from this school, only 25% would have graduated from high school. And of that 25%, almost no one would have gone on to college. But thanks to Mr. Lang and the support he and the community provided, 48 out of 52 of those students graduated from high school, and of that 48, 40 went on to college. Here at PS 121, in the heart of Harlem, we see perfectly illustrated what Benjamin Singer wrote about: the power of a child's vision with the help of the community to overcome history and economics, to motivate that child to extraordinary achievements. So, when we ask our children, what are you going to be when you grow up? We are helping them to think about something that is very important. Never treat their answers as trivial, even if they change their mind every week. We listen to show our children that their dreams of the future are significant, and our interest in their dreams builds their confidence and ability to shape their own future. For nations, for children, we see the same pattern, the same power, the power of vision. This is Auschwitz. It seems a strange place to come to talk about vision. During World War II, millions of people, mostly Jews, but Poles and Russians and Gypsies too, were put to death in camps like this. The reason we have come here is to examine the importance of vision under the worst possible conditions. It was here that the third scholar who influenced me made his discoveries. His name was Viktor Frankl. He was a psychiatrist in Vienna. He had a good practice, lived the good life. He was Jewish. When World War II broke out, he was rounded up by the Nazis along with thousands of others and brought in freight cars to this hell on earth. When he arrived, Frankl set 3 goals for himself. 1, to survive. 2, to use his medical skills and help where he could. And 3, to try and learn something. Imagine that, to try and learn something amidst the Holocaust. Well, Frankl succeeded in all 3 of his goals. And after the war, he went back to Vienna and wrote his now classic book, Man's Search for Meaning, in which he illuminated what he learned. Among the many things that he learned, he was able to identify a key characteristic that helped separate those who survived from those who didn't. He suggested that if you and I had been at these gates and had been asked to predict who would endure the ordeal and who would not, we would most assuredly have been wrong, because we would have picked the young and the strong and the healthy and the beautiful. And while those characteristics did help somewhat in the short term for a day or a week or a month, something totally different was required for long-term survival. Millions died. Yet among those who survived, Viktor Frankl found a common thread, a trait essential to their survival. All of those who made it through had something significant yet to do in their future. Let me repeat that. All of those who made it through had something significant yet to do in their future. And here we see the pattern again, the power of a vision of the future to help overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. Let me illustrate with one of Frankel's stories. Two men were going to commit suicide. It was a common occurrence here in the camp. Their friends literally saved their lives by reminding them of their future. For the one, it was his child whom he adored and who was waiting for him in a foreign country. For the other, it was a thing, not a person. This man was a scientist and had written a series of books which still needed to be finished. His work could not be done by anyone else. And once they were reminded of their responsibilities to their future, they accepted it and were empowered to continue and survive. It worked for Frankel, too. He writes, "Almost in tears from pain, I kept thinking of the endless little problems of our miserable life. What would there be to eat tonight? If a piece of sausage came as an extra ration, should I exchange it for a piece of bread? Should I trade my last cigarette, which was left from a bonus I received a fortnight ago, for a bowl of soup? How could I get a piece of wire to replace the fragment which served as one of my shoelaces? Who could help me to obtain work in camp instead of undertaking this horribly long daily march? I became disgusted with the state of affairs which compelled me daily and hourly to think of only such trivial things. I forced my thoughts to turn to another subject. Suddenly, I saw myself standing on the platform of a well-lit, warm and pleasant lecture room. In front of me sat an attentive audience on comfortable upholstered chairs. I was giving a lecture on the psychology of the concentration camp. By this method, I succeeded somehow in rising above the situation, above the suffering of the moment, and he observed them as if they were now of the past." Frankel's message is clear. It is essential for you, for me, to have something significant yet to do, to have a positive vision of our future, because that is what gives meaning to life. Frankel wrote, "It is a peculiarity of man that he can only live by looking to the future. And this is his salvation in even the most difficult moments of his existence." We have come here to share a metaphor. You see, in our lives, we all have rivers to cross. On the other shore is our future. Sometimes the river is calm and the crossing is easy, but other times the river is turbulent, full of unpredictability. Too often during these turbulent times, we try to cross the river just by jumping in and starting to swim. We find ourselves swept away in the current, washed downstream. We hope that where we end up on the other side will be good enough. But there is a better way to cross the river, have a vision of our future. Then, when we see our vision beckoning to us with its positive power, it will reach like a rope back across the river to give us something to hang on to as we step into the water. Now, the river's going to grab at us, try to break our grip, try to carry us away from our destination. It takes work to hang on. We have to pull with our own muscles, think with our own minds, commit with our own hearts. No one else can do the work for us. And while there is no guarantee that we will arrive at our goals, this rope, extended from the power of our vision, offers us our best connection to the future. And if we grab it firmly in our hands, then we will be ready to take the plunge and venture toward tomorrow. We have looked at nations that have risen from nothing to world shapers. We've examined the research on the key ingredients that make children successful. We have visited a place where people were put through the most difficult conditions that human beings could be put through and survived. And all of these have a common thread: the power of a positive vision of the future. Now, I bet I know what you're all thinking. Where is the corporate discussion? If it works for nations, and it works for kids, and it works for adults, does it work for organizations? Of course. In fact, this discussion is fundamental to human nature at all scales. Organizations are one of the best places to see this illustrated because they have the proper size and complexity to really use vision's power. Think about organizations, beginning and mature, profit and non-profit, who are doing amazingly well, and I'll bet they're being driven by a vision. So, question, what makes up great vision? First, let me tell you something that isn't part of the vision. In fact, it's a mistake to have it a part of the vision. Vision is never expressed in numbers. Those numbers are always a consequence of a vision achieved. So, what are the key ingredients? Well, first, visions need to be developed by leaders. Visions are not created by the masses. Now, good leaders talk to their people and listen to their people. By the way, they listen and explore the world as well. But it is the role of leadership, not of followers, to take all that input and focus it and bring it into a coherent, powerful vision. Second, visions of the leaders must be shared with their team, and the team must agree to support it. If you have that sharing and that support, you then have created the vision community. For organizations, the sharing, by the way, creates agreement on direction. And once you have direction agreement, it in fact improves your decision-making significantly because every decision can be measured against the vision's direction. The vision community must act together to bring the vision to reality. Third, a vision, in order to be successful, must be comprehensive and detailed. Generalities just won't do. We want to be number one in the marketplace. We want to be a world-class company. We want to be the most innovative in our industry. Those are nice words, but they don't make a vision. To have a vision, we must know how and when and why and what with enough precision so that each member in the vision community can find his or her significant and important place in the vision. Everyone must know how they are going to contribute and participate. Fourth, vision must be positive and inspiring. A vision should have reach. It should challenge each and every one of us to grow substantially, to stretch their skills, to reach beyond their ordinary reach. A vision must be worth the effort. When you create your vision, it is better to err on the side of too great a vision than not great enough.
Joel, it seems to me, I like what you're saying about vision, but you haven't mentioned values anywhere here.
That's a good question. Someone once said to me, in turbulent times like what we're living in now, the only thing that'll get you through is your values. I suggested there was another way to think about that. Values are the way you measure the rightness of your direction. You see, without values, you might in fact create a vision that's immoral or unethical. Values protect you from making that mistake. But values, even though they are essential to vision, cannot give you direction. Only vision can do that. It is the role of vision to determine your destination. Leader initiated, shared and supported, comprehensive and detailed, positive and inspiring. When you get all of those put together, you've got your vision community. And once you have the vision community, now you are empowered. There's a story I'd like to share with you. It was inspired by the writings of Loren Eiseley. Eiseley was a very special person because he combined the best of two cultures. He was a scientist and a poet. And from those two perspectives, he wrote insightfully and beautifully about our world and our role in it. There was a wise man, much like Eiseley himself, who used to go to the ocean to do his writing. He had a habit of walking on the beach before he began his work. One day, he was walking along the shore. Down the beach, he saw a human figure moving like a dancer. He smiled to himself to think of someone who would dance to the day. So he began to walk faster to catch up. As he got closer, he saw that it was a young man, and the young man wasn't dancing, but instead he was reaching down to the shore, picking up something, and very gently throwing it into the ocean. As he got closer, he called out, "Good morning, what are you doing?" The young man paused, looked up, and replied, "Throwing starfish in the ocean." I guess I should have asked, "Why are you throwing starfish in the ocean?" "The sun is up, and the tide is going out, and if I don't throw them in, they'll die." "But young man, don't you realize that there are miles and miles of beach and starfish all along it? You can't possibly make a difference." The young man listened politely, then bent down, picked up another starfish, and threw it into the sea, past the breaking waves. It made a difference for that one. His response surprised the man. He was upset. He didn't know how to reply. So instead, he turned away and walked back to the cottage to begin his writings. All day long, as he wrote, the image of that young man haunted him. He tried to ignore it, but the vision persisted. Finally, late in the afternoon, he realized that he, the scientist, he, the poet, had missed the essential nature of the young man's actions. Because he realized that what the young man was doing was choosing not to be an observer in the universe and watch it pass by, but was choosing to be an actor in the universe and make a difference. He was embarrassed. That night he went to bed, troubled. When morning came, he awoke knowing that he had to do something. So he got up, put on his clothes, went to the beach, and found the young man. And with him, he spent the rest of the morning throwing starfish in the ocean. You see, what that young man's actions represents is something that is special in each and every one of us. We have all been gifted with the ability to make a difference. And if we can, like that young man, become aware of that gift, we gain, through the strength of our visions, the power to shape the future. And that is your challenge, and that is my challenge. We must each find our starfish. And if we throw our stars wisely and well, I have no questions that the 21st century is going to be a wonderful place. Remember, vision without action is merely a dream. Action without vision just passes the time. Vision with action can change the world.